poem is called I Do It All for Oral Schmidt. Language is the trash of thoughts. Even after the morning after, feeling sick to my stomach, but ready to keep going because she seemed like the kind of drinker who finished the party at brunch. Even after I told her she didn't seem too big into honesty, even after she grabbed my face and said, just keep wasting me like this and I'll keep answering your calls, I couldn't believe the line worked. I'm as prepared to hear yes from a beautiful woman as I am to find a mermaid in my coffee. I almost fucked it all up by explaining all processes produce excrement, and the presence of excrement is proof that something has been made. And thought is a process, just like eating is a process, just like living is a process, just like evolving is a process. And the only thing we can be sure expelled by thought is language, because we can hear the words in our heads, and you are so beautiful, and so fucking sexy. And Rothko makes me feel things I only ever feel around Caravaggio and sexy, beautiful, intimidating, inflammable women. I wasn't surprised by the headache. I wasn't surprised by the weakness in my legs. I wasn't surprised my breath smelled like a plague wagon. And I wasn't surprised it took me a decade to get over the one night I made good with Oral Schmidt. But I was shocked my flask was still full of the cheap vodka I planned to use as a last night antiseptic. So one of the joys of the smartphone era is I don't have to tell you who Oral Schmidt is. You guys can just look it up during the break. Or now, I don't care. The next poem is called Exclamation Points in Brooklyn. I doubt you'll have to look up the key reference in this one. In the Brooklyn Public Library, Walt Whitman soldered exclamation points onto the names of everything he knew to give visible expression to the shock of existence. After the Civil War, Whitman traveled to all of the states and several of the territories and all of the cities where journalists who had covered the Civil War had settled to cover everything else. Walt Whitman collected the unused exclamation points journalists no longer needed, since the Civil War had rendered daily events less exciting by contrast. And while collecting exclamation points, Whitman also gathered surplus periods, I dots, dashes, slashes, and underscores to kludge visual approximations of exclamation points should he run out of the real thing before completing his everything project of life. Punctuation is the semaphore of language. Unlike most of us, death was not gradual for Walt Whitman. He soldered shock without cease until, stillness like a storm about to heave blue buzzed through the reading room's open windows, mortality slapped Whitman like a languorous fly into itself. The shockwave of such sudden finality scattered his remaining magazine of exclamation points and component parts for exclamation points all over Brooklyn. Raining down in Fort Greene to build stands of cattails and crosswalks, raining down in Carroll Gardens to build isometric exercise courses on sidewalks, raining down in Dumbo to build bamboo forests on rooftops, raining down in Park Slope to build beer bottle drying racks for homebrewers and car parks, raining down in Red Hook to build stages for lewd and amusing marionette shows. And yes, people were pierced by the falling lines or bludgeoned by the falling points. In Bushwick, a pierced man became scaffolding for a different building than he now surrounded. In Williamsburg, a bludgeoned man became the hour-off shadow of a mailbox. In Crown Heights, a pierced man became a wrought iron fire escape coiled around the trunk of and climbing into the canopy of a recently transferred tree. In Flatbush, a bludgeoned man became a sandwich board on the sidewalk declaring a sale on items only available in San Francisco. In Walt Whitman's reading room, in the Brooklyn Public Library, his death was expressed by excitement appearing in unsettling places in all of the open books, mystifying a few readers, while the rest kissed their fingertips. Just like that. Weariness pursued me all through my last day in Brooklyn. I had been active, and activity drains you. Then Saturday night got away from me, which is a passive construction for saying I had no plans or desires, yet did not get home until 4 a.m. You see, I had friends and talked, and we'd eaten our fill of the food presented to us, and we found ourselves at the Hot Bird, where we could drink beer and cocktails and sit outside on picnic tables and smoke and talk as long as we wanted, and it was Brooklyn, so we could talk and drink for as long as we wanted, provided we broke no laws and offended none of our fellows talking and drinking and smoking with us. The fuels fueled the fuel. The weariness that had pursued me all through this last day of my trip to Brooklyn could not keep up. We talked about work, we talked about play, we talked about women, we talked about music, we talked about death, which is to say, Saturday night got away from me. We drank, and then, midway through the night, a small group of women, far too young for us, arrived and sat down at a table in sight. One young woman was short, with a pixie haircut, large dark eyes, lipstick that might have been dark violet, but was certainly a close friend of black, a dog collar-style choker with short silver studs, an olive army jacket, short denim shorts braided at the hems, and sloppily tied above the ankle Doc Martens. In short, she was my idiosyncratic beauty. She was a version of the agent the CIA would send to seduce and destroy me should my power influence grow to become too great. In short, I would have painted her exactly as she was. The beautiful, the sexy, the kind of threatening, the sexy that I can see without having to see. In short, one of my vague and precise internal images have been colonized by its own external example, and where I once saw a type in my imagination, I now saw her. I watched her for the rest of the night. I watched, and on Saturday nights that get away from you, to watch is to love. On our way out, I asked what she was drinking. A smile to erase 8 hangovers and 3 plagues. I set the answer drink by her hand, wished her good evening, and flagged down a cab to drive my drunk romantic ass home. Shock takes much longer to be itself in the afterlife. It feels like an afternoon spent on the porch with beer and books, a hyper-polysyllabic yop for which Walt Whitman needed punctuation of longer duration. He considered until stray pairs of blue-buzz heaved oak trees, and Walt Whitman began the mark with, "America does not repel the past." Thank you. All you smartphoners, there's another name you might not recognize in the title. This next one is called Jacques Laplante Was a Decade Too Late. His stomach felt like a swamp before every game. Stagnant, scummy, stinking, sessy water, boggy plants, and big snakes. It felt real bad, but it had life. It was there. Tonight, the swamp was dead. It was there in his stomach, but it was dead. People herded their cars in the parking lot, then herded themselves in the hockey arena. They gathered concessions, kept track of the kids, exchanged the language built up in their brains over the week. The important thing about this is important. He was covered by bruises. He was always covered with bruises. If he wasn't, they wouldn't play him. Most of the time, he was covered with bruises the same way he was covered by clothes. Tonight, his bruises felt like damage. Damage in his organs. He always led the team out of the locker room. This said something about his importance, a place of value, of course, and respect, but also another lonely responsibility. It was time to lead the team out of the locker room. The ice was suddenly 10 miles away. Recent studies have shown that sitting still for extended periods of time, as required in most modern workplaces, takes almost as many years off your life as smoking cigarettes. The body evolved with a great deal of flexibility, but there is still a limit. It is strange how easy it is to discover what we did not evolve to endure. Stranger, how easy it is to endure those discoveries. 25 saves and a 5-3 win is something to be proud of. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel anything. No, he found a feeling, entombed in the tomb of his bruise. He felt wrong. Sitting on the bench in the locker room, all his teammates doing things. Then he was on the floor. Of all the places he had ever been, he'd never been on a locker room floor. Something new was happening, and it had nothing to do with pain. And this will be my final poem of the evening. And for those of you keeping track of the time, that means it's going to be a long poem. So you have been warned about that. This is called The Artistic Life in Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the People. The artistic life died in a medical tent, Civil War, when young Walt Whitman clasped the palm meant for the reaper. A soldier for Union and slave had been shot, had been pierced, had been torn, had been rent, and should die. And the dark, he will end in the grave. There were words for young Walt who could begin to reign, as if words had the moxie for ending the reign of our war. As Walt Whitman was catching his breath with shut eyes and ears shut and hands clasped in joint pain, he prepared to rewrite Our New Beautiful Death. The soldier pulled through. Sensitive intellectuals may not be much to look at, given how much time is spent away from the sun and the gym, how rarely the suggested number of hours of sleep are acquired, how eyes are fixed to screens and books, but the body always goes before the mind goes, and modern medicine ensures the body persists after it goes for decades, and you'll have to talk about something once you've eroded to just sitting around. My God. The simmering hell of old people who don't read, gone bodies staring at each other, just waiting to die. The artistic life died in a capsule of time in the 50s. We assumed it would be a crime if nuclear war did erase from this earth the American state, sent by God, in its prime. But the capsule was excavated, yanked from its birth to make way for the first Montessori-based school in the state, which was built in the Usonia School. The artistic life crushed by the footballer's sled. We ignited the trove and got barely a jewel. The few contents with fire resistance, the Marines had to shred, except for the sexy parts which were retained for research by top men. Sensitive intellectuals aren't the dates you bring to show off at class reunions, except for the very small number who reach a level of fame, assuming there are people in your graduating class who pay attention to the modes of society in which sensitive intellectuals reach a level of fame. But they are fantastic kissers. And they drink the kind of booze that provides stamina instead of lethargy, and conjure their whiskey demons as buskers at pedestrian shopping malls playing for wine money. And they know the definition of nixto, so go through the notes for their critical rereading of the Peter Sellers episode of The Muppet Show through their hangovers, while you clutch your skull and curse God for giving your head feelings. The artistic life died when Ray Chandler replaced Dashiell Hammett. Americans chose, with pale haste, the prosaic contentment of stabilized crime, where murder is death. That's all. Simple and chaste. Just the prose worth exactly one story per dime. Both conceded is probably fine should you club a crook dead, but it's Hammett who knows the just club is still empty, a myth at best, likely a lie. Much like fact, but unlike the red blood on the club, and regardless of every attempt we may try, the lead falcon is real. Sensitive intellectuals are a lot like Catholics, because the font of their massive effort is shame. Shame when faced with the accomplishments of past rivals and contemporary geniuses. Shame in their inability to reclaim a role in governance. Shame from moments of weakness when solace is taken from the exploitative products foisted on the masses by greedy and indifferent corporations. And yes, shame at the fuzzy lines drawn by their figures, the impossibility of getting a slick haircut, at how awkwardly they stand at wedding receptions, at how we can explore the de-agenting of evil through Marxist historical materialism, Foucault's systems of power, Baudrillard's procession, as reflected in Zizek's gonzo pop culture phenomenology, as expressed by the zombie, a perfectly passive actor as a symbol for evil in works such as Dawn of the Dead, the Left 4 Dead video game series, and Colson Whitehead's Zone 1, but can't put together the sentences, "Hi, my name is Josh. What are you reading?" It's difficult to concurrently court people and significance. It's not unheard of to succeed with both. It's not impossible to talk your way into someone's heart, thoughts, pants, and or right back out again. And it is not impossible to carve enough time away from reading dynamic, stylistically challenging early 21st century Hungarian novelists to work out 4 or 5 days a week, so you don't get slapped with the disappointment stick every time you pass a mirror. Though, sometimes disappointment is the point. Our society constantly prescribes cures for disappointment. There's always something to buy when we get passed over for the promotion, left off the honor roll, uncast in the school play, not included in the final round of interviews. We prepared, we cultivated, we trained, and eventually, after years and years of effort, we are rewarded with an absence from the podium. In that moment of disappointment, denial proves value. And we will be provers. And from the proving, all will follow. Artistic, intellectual, alive, and sensitive, yet somehow Byron scored. Is there a fact new Byrons can derive about what women want or will reward, or why persistence always reaches certain goals? Alas, our random heavens live beyond attempt. Chance weekends, spiked punch bowls, whatever, man, let's drink, get laid, forgive. Art wrestled every big old angry bull from Parking Town to Penn and Farmer's Field, in part because it might exert a pull on people made inclined at last to yield. Shit. This pickup line should have been a villanelle. Thank you.